Mark Wales, welcome to the Dyl Friends podcast, my friend. It's an honour, it's a pleasure, it's a privilege to have you in the studio, and something I've been really looking forward to for a long time.
Mate, I love your setup here, and thanks for having me. It's good to be back in the Melbourne CBD after a long year.
It has been a very, very long year, mate. You have a story that is incredible. It's multifaceted. Like, we could do a series on it. We were just saying before, I don't know how we're going to fit everything in, but we're going to try our best.
Beauty.
Let's go back to the start, okay? You're a young man growing up in WA. We love our WA. Got a big supporter base over in WA. It's beautiful people on the Pilbara. Take us back there, mate. Young man, and you're in school, and you decide, look, the army's for me. It was always an option.
Yeah, I think when I was basically born in the north of WA, like up in the Pilbara. So eventually moved down to Perth, and it's just Perth's a long way from anything. I mean, in the 90s, it was a long way from any of the big cities. So most of my family, we were tradies, or Dad worked in the mine up in Newman. So the expectations for us weren't high. Our parents were just happy if we weren't out causing too much trouble. So eventually, when I was in high school once, though, I saw some pictures from the Iranian embassy siege, which was in London in 1980, and it just had the pictures of these guys dressed in black storming a building, rescuing all these hostages. So when I saw that, I was like, holy shit, who are these guys? And that's when I started doing some homework and realised that they were SAS, they were British SAS. They had this long history going all the way back to World War II, and they were elite soldiers, and it was super hard to get into. So I thought, you know what, this is the path I want to take. And I found out Australia had an SAS as well, and that was like, oh, this might actually be doable. I might be able to go through the army and actually, get into this force potentially.
I suppose we were chatting off air about this earlier, but this is literally today going to be a podcast for dummies, learning about the Defence Force, the SAS, your story, what actually goes on, overseas in these tours, and how it all plays out. Because in a way, in Australia, we're so blind to what actually happens. And speaking from my point of view, I have really no idea how this even transpires. How do you go into the army? How do you join the Defence Force? How do you get into the SAS? What do you actually do? What's a tour? And hoping today we can unpack all those things, which I'm sure we will. Your journey. How did that happen? You joined the Defence Force out of school as is it a uni degree that you do there?
Yeah. So when I first heard about the SAS, I was like, how do I actually get in? And I rang the front gate. They had like a guard room down there, and I picked up the phone and called them. I was like, I wanted to talk to someone, and the guy goes, "Who is this?" And I went, "Oh, it's Mark. I'm in high school, and I wanted to join the SAS." He's like, "Who are you?" And I went, "No, seriously, it's just a kid from high school." And he goes, "Well, you've got to go to the recruiting agency and talk to them about it. We're not going to say anything here." I was like, "Okay." And I went down to the recruiting agency in Northbridge in Perth and said, I want to try and join the army, because I knew you had to go through the army to try and get to the SAS. And as I looked at that world, I started to see kind of more and more how it's kind of built. So there is the army, but there's also these other branches within it. So you can be a dentist in the army, or you can be you can drive a tank, or you can be a foot soldier. So there are all these different specializations in the military, and I had to learn about this stuff. And the thing that I saw that attracted me to the army was an infantry soldier, which is a foot soldier, because I knew it would be the hardest job in there. Like, to actually have to carry a weapon and be on foot in these combat zones would be quite hard. And so when I was looking at applying, I thought, what do I do? Do I try and go direct to the army, or there's this other training establishment called ADFA, which is where Australian Defence Force Academy, which is where you can go and you get a secondary, you get a degree basically. So I thought, I'll try and go through this Defence Academy, which then takes you to Duntroon, because at least I'll have, a school qualification. So if I go through the army, I don't get the SAS, at least I've got something to fall back on. And that's what took me down the path of becoming an officer. And so to apply, you have to finish year 12, and you do all your tests and psych tests, and they make sure you physically don't have serious issues. And then if you get all that right, you go to a panel of military officers, and they basically watch you work. They do these tests where they watch you in a group over a day, and they get you to present. And it's pretty kind of old fashioned, but they're just watching how you interact and work in a team, whether you can fit in or whether you're a total idiot. They're just trying to see that in people, and they want to know kind of what they're dealing with. And then they make a recommendation based on whether you can join or not. And so that's kind of what I was heading towards in grade 12. And I started doing running and trying to be fit and stay out of trouble, just so I could meet the requirements to get in. And that's kind of what got me started.
I love that. I love that you've just picked up the phone and just calling the SAS straight up, just being like, look, hey, keen has to join. Like, where do I sign up? Just thinking that it's just like exactly. That easy.
I'll come right down to the barracks now. Just
keen, mate.
Train me up.
Yeah, that's unbelievable though, and that's like, we always chat about this on this show, but from your story, you're a doer. Like, you don't really think about things. You're just like, no, if there's something I want to do, I do it. And I'm sure we'll get into a lot more of those parts of your
something I forgot about, but in grade 10, because it's a year after I decided I want to go there, I applied to do work experience at the SAS. So people were going off into different companies and doing work experience. And I told my grade instructor, I'm like, I want to go try do it at the regiment. She goes, I don't think we can do that. It's never been done before. Yeah. And so I think the school wrote letters to the barracks, and the barracks said, yeah, we'll take him. And it was me and one other kid from another school, just randomly. We went down there and they put us in the gym with the physical instructors for 2 weeks. And when I was at the gym, I got to see all the relics of the SAS and the base and some of the weapons, and I heard the stories about what they'd done in this Vietnam and then in Gulf War One. There was not Gulf War One, 1998. There'd been some deployments that had happened, but I was only a kid, and it was great to see the base and everything that was there. It's
so fascinating, and even today, as you said, there's so many different ways you can get in there. It's not one route into the SAS. So you joined the RDAF.
ADFA is the academy, Australian Defence Force Academy, and that's over in Canberra.
And what's the rules of that? Like, you go in there, you obviously, as you said, you're studying and you're also doing your basic training.
Yeah, I went there. I'm like, how is this actually set up? So they're partnered with University of New South Wales, and there's a campus, and you go over there and do induction. So you get military training when you first join, and it's just basic, weapons handling and drill and marching around, and an introduction to military life. And I don't think anyone kind of forgets their first day of being in the military. And once you're in the gate there, you do your military training, and then during the year you do academic training. So you go into classes. I was doing an undergrad in history and politics, and you do that for 3 years, and in your uni break you're off in the bush doing field training rather than on holiday.
And for you, from that training, is that a smooth transition? Is that like straight away you went, okay, now I'm going to apply for the SAS and go from there?
No, I kind of saw a path which was going to be, all right, I'm going to go through the officer training, which is 4 years. I'm going to go into the wider army, which is going to be the infantry battalions. And so they're in Townsville and Darwin. I'm going to join one of those battalions. I'm going to try and do my best there. And after spending 2 or 3 years in a battalion, you can then apply for SAS selection.
Right. So how long is this process all up?
So it took 4 years of training in the army, and then another 3 years in the battalion before I got onto selection. So it took, it was 11 years start to finish from when I decided I want to go to the army to when I got to the actual selection course.
Unbelievable.
It was a long time.
That's a long time. And with the selection as well, is it as simple as anyone can apply, or you have to be approached to go, no, you're allowed to apply for this?
No, anyone can apply, and then you sit another battery of tests there. So you go through, everything from psychometric testing to a physical barrier test. They check your discipline record. There's all these little gates they put you through again, and then they say, all right, you're clear to attend SAS selection. You can go on, and that's when you march on. And even then, once you're on, the pass rates maybe anywhere from 10 to 15% sort of thing.
This is huge, and this is something that I suppose I've been so fascinated about for so long. You've seen movies, in the US, they call it Hell Week, I think. I'm not sure if they refer to it as that in Australia, but the SAS selection criteria is obviously, it is an extremely, extremely tough process. What takes place in these camps? Like, what sort of testing is it? Is it physical? I'm assuming a lot of it's physical, but is it more physical from your point of view, or is it more mental side of training to harden you and actually get you ready for what might be taking place? Yeah,
when they first get you, it's going to be about a 3-week course, the first selection period, to say, all right, you're suitable to do the rest of the training to become an SAS soldier. And so I knew it was broken into roughly 3 phases. There's like an opening week where they give you a battery of tests, long range pack marches, running in kind of body armor and with a weapon, fitness tests, all sorts of navigation tests. And this is all done so that the people that haven't prepared get knocked out of the course straight away. And there's a strong correlation between people that pass those kind of opening tests and finishing selection. If you can pass those tests, you have a much higher probability of finishing the selection course. So they do that up front, and that's kind of, when I was there actually, and I remember seeing it, that was kind of designed to weed out the unprepared. And then there was a middle phase, and that was called, I think it was called Happy Wanderer. And that's an endurance phase where you're given a pack and a set of checkpoints, and over 5 or 6 days, you've got to navigate your way through the bush on your own. You don't know how long you're out there for. You don't know, you can't talk to anyone. It's psychologically quite hard, and you're under a lot of stress when you're trying to get through the bush, really rough terrain, trying to meet these checkpoints.
So you're on like a solo mission by yourself, trying to find certain checkpoints.
Yep.
It gives me anxiety thinking about it.
Yep. And it was very, very tough. And there's no one on your back shouting at you, but it's still the motivation.
It's almost harder being by yourself.
It's all internal motivation. And that's the hardest thing about the course is you have to get up every day after 2 hours of sleep and go and throw yourself into it again. And there's no one there shouting at you, telling you to do it. It all comes from kind of within you. They treat you like like an adult. It's good like that. And then the final phase is kind of similar to that Hell Week, where you put in small teams, and the expectation is that you work together under really tough conditions. You don't get sleep, you don't get food, and you've got to execute these really tough missions around the clock, 24/7. And they're watching to see how people work together in teams under situation that's really simulates combat conditions. Because that's what it's like. You don't sleep much. You're always under stress. It's hard.
I suppose as well, it's getting you ready for that worst case scenario, as you said. I don't want to fast forward this too much, but those situations in that selection period, did anything compare to that in actual battle, or do you think that Hell Week was like so hard that when you're in battle you could go back, you know what, I got through this, I can get through this?
I think the training, I think no one forgets that selection course. It's that bloody hard. It's you're at your worst in a lot of situations, and in some cases, I think it's even harder than combat, because combat's a bit clearer. You got a mission. You know what you're executing towards. Sometimes on selection it was pretty difficult. So, the training prepares you well. It prepares you really well for combat.
Success rate of that?
Selection, I think, is anywhere from 10 to 20%, and then you've got to get through 18 months of training where you can still be kicked out during that phase as well.
Wow, that's unbelievable. So, how many people would sign up for that first one? As you said, you weed out the people that aren't as prepared early to then get to the end. How many of you would graduate of that SAS team that year? Yeah,
so I think there was roughly 100 on the year I joined, and there were about 20 at the end. And actually, there's a phase I skipped over. So I was joining as an officer. So I would be a captain going to the SAS, and there was a section in there called the officer module. And when I did it, it was like 48 or 72 hours where they pulled aside the officers and they made us do really complex planning missions that we'd then have to brief to experienced SAS guys, and they'd rip our plans to shreds. And all these difficult kind of mental challenges, and that was used to test the planning capabilities of the officers in the group.
One thing I had, obviously listened to a lot of podcasts with Sam. We were so fascinated about your story. And one thing that really surprised me, but now that you said it in this other show, it made sense. But you're a big boy. You're 6'3", large
6'3",
boy. Yeah,
heavy.
You could eat me easily, maybe. And no, definitely. But the biggest part that was crazy was, and I think the misconception of someone that thinks of the SAS, you think these guys are all big boys, strong, everything. But you were saying that it's actually sometimes a bit harder to be a bigger lad and get into the SAS team. Normally it's sort of smaller, wirier guys that can move around a fair bit. Yeah,
I don't think there's a particular type. Like, I've seen all shapes and sizes in the unit, but they're generally all robust guys. They're not that archetypal, Rambo-looking bloke. They're unassuming, strong-looking guys. You'd see them on the street, and you probably wouldn't look twice at some of them. They're just standard size guys that are strong and just have really high levels of motivation and resilience. So yeah, and I'm a bigger guy. I'm on the bigger end of the spectrum there. And I think that meant I knew I would have to work harder on the endurance stuff. That would be my weakness. But if you can get over the threshold, the minimum threshold for that, then the rest you can do too. So
something that as well with this training I'm so fascinated about, and I think it's so prevalent in SAS that you need to be good at, is above the shoulders, and that resilience, that mental thinking under pressure, resilience, all these things. Was it crazy, I suppose, going into these SAS selection camp, and you probably see 4 or 5 guys from an outside perspective thinking, geez, this bloke's big, he's strong, looks like a leader, looks fantastic, he's got the big muscles and everything. But then it gets to those times where, and then you see someone else where you go, geez, this bloke's going to last 3 minutes. And then throughout the camp, it just totally flips.
Yeah. I remember jumping on the bus on the way up to Bindoon, and I saw a guy sitting on the bus, and he was about 5'2", looked like he was about 16, and he was shitting himself. His eyes are darting around. I was like, mate, do your parents know you're down here? Yeah. And sure enough, he was there at the end. Just he was a real blood and guts guy. He just hung in there and was really strong and became one of my closest mates actually on the reinforcement cycle. And then there's these other guys, these big axes from the battalion that are battalion legends and fought in the recon teams, and they just disappear. So it was not what you would seem. Guys would stick around that you just wouldn't expect to still be there at the end. It's kind of it's an unusual bunch of guys, but they all have similar traits in that sense. They're all well motivated. They got high levels of self-discipline, high levels of self-control, good problem solvers, good leaders. Like it's a good selection course. It's really well run, at least when I saw it.
It's huge, man. I get goosebumps actually thinking about that, because it seems like by the end of these camps that you just have such a belief in each other. And I suppose that's the aim of the camp, is you're going to be going into life or death situations. If you can't trust the person that you're next to, how are you going to trust them when it's the heat of battle?
Yeah, the training's good because you're constantly being put in situations that just outside of what you can do. They're just a bit uncomfortable, and you're constantly in that discomfort zone. And because of that, you're growing a lot. And by the end of the training, by the end of the 18 months, you're now capable of doing stuff that you would never have thought you could do at the start. But the Army is very good at training people. They do it incrementally, they're safe, they do it repetitively. And the good thing about the Special Forces teams is they just do the basics really well. They do it better than anyone, because doing the basics consistently all the time is actually hard. It's hard to do that stuff, but they're just good at it. They hammer away at it until they've got it down and can do it without thinking.
I feel like as well, I'm really harping on this, I apologise, but I'm so interested in this selection process of, even when the commanders or the people in charge are running these courses, I feel like, and it'd be good to get obviously the answer on this, is no matter what the challenge is, and even if you did it at the best of the ability, they could be like, go do that again. And it's not the fact that you actually did it, it's more to see like the setback and how you then deal with it and keep going and just not give up and crack it.
Yeah, there was one story I tell about, we went down to this like parade ground area that was all pea gravel, size of a couple of tennis courts, and there were 3 ambulances parked down there with the doors open, and we knew we were about to do a beasting kind of session, and just the fear. And once we got down there, we're on these big green ropes, and we had to do push-ups and move them, and we're in the push-up position for nearly 3 hours, and we kept failing at the mission they'd given us, which was to move these ropes a certain distance. And they knew we were never going to achieve what they wanted us to do, but they were watching the mental breakdown of people when the stress of that started to get to them. And some people would kind of would really let themselves spiral mentally and would pull out of the selection course because of it. And some other guys would just kind of hang in there, just persevere. And I think that became a theme that you don't necessarily have to be the best, but you have to be there at the end,
What did you do in those situations? Like, do you think that was hardwired in you for the resilience, or was it something you had to work on to actually be present and be like, this is what they're doing, I just can't fucking give up?
Yeah, I think I gave myself permission. I had that kind of self-talk where it's like, you're going to make mistakes on this, and you're not going to do it like once every now and then. You're going to be doing it every 20 minutes, right? And I just said to myself, you've got to be comfortable making mistakes and putting it behind you and keep going. And I think that's the hardest bit, is not letting that negative self-talk accumulate. If you can find a way to kind of put it behind you and keep moving forward, it's kind of key, because there's nothing you can do about it once it's done, but you can learn from it and you can keep going. So you're going to fail. It's just your response to it is what you can control.
For sure. It's a massive point. Like, I'm even precursing this before, because it's nothing like anything you've done. But I talk about pre-season and running, for example. And the only way that I could like trick myself into getting through sessions sometimes, not, again, I precursor this, anyone listening, I'm not comparing myself to an SAS soldier, but you put yourself in such a uncomfortable position, you almost get to a stage sometimes where you're like, I actually can't be in any more pain than I am right now. Like, even if I keep going, I'm so fucking sore. It's not going to get any worse than this.
Yeah, it's actually, and what you're talking about is exactly the same thing as what we do, and it's the same in any team of people that are trying to achieve something at a high level. Doesn't matter if it's sport or the military or politics or an ER team. You join as a team. There's values. There's a certain skill level you need to achieve. There's training. There's your own kind of psychology in this, that it might be a goal of yours, and there's a lot of fear and hope attached to it. It's exactly the same situation, those elite teams. And the same thing I had when I was trying to play high-level footy. I had those same feelings of discomfort and fear and, and needing to persevere. They're all there in sport too.
Yeah. You graduate selection, is that what it's called?
You pass selection.
You pass selection?
Pass selection, and then you go into the reinforcement cycle, which is the training courses that you need, and a whole squadron of guys handles this at SAS. They're all the training courses you need to be fully qualified to go out and do the work of a special forces soldier. Okay,
so you go into another form of training after this?
Yeah, you do. So once you're done, you do all the detailed skills they've got. So you work in close country, and you'll get training in how to move around and be in camouflage, and then you get parachuting, you do demolitions and heavy weapons. All these skills that you would just dream about in the battalions and never get to do, they had this stuff kind of on tap. So it was great like that.
That's so just those things you were talking about there, which was, it was funny how calmly you were talking about parachuting and all that sort of stuff. How dangerous is this SAS training, the selection training?
Some of the training is really dangerous because it's done at a super high level, and the idea is it's got to be at a really high level, live rounds, in the dark, night vision, because that's what we're going to face in combat. And so they don't baby you in training. We do it safely, but sometimes you're exposed to really dangerous situations. Black Hawk accident, I think it was mid-90s, two Black Hawks collided on approach to target, and I think it was about 16 guys were killed.
Friendly?
Two helicopters, two Black Hawks collided, and a lot of guys were killed in that. I had a mate killed in the South Pacific in a helicopter crash, vehicle accidents. It's dangerous stuff. It's really dangerous training. And before you've even gotten to combat, you've got to get through all that stuff. And we've got the names on the memorial of a lot of guys that died training. It's risky.
What is the role of an SAS soldier? I know that's a very dumb question, I feel like, but what is the difference between a SAS soldier and someone that is fighting on the ground in the Defence Force?
I think the difference is that so there's a couple of different areas. One is the standards of equipment and training and is much higher. Obviously, you're in a special force unit, you've got more resourcing for that. But then the most important distinction is the level of the task that you're given. So ours will be more in the strategic realm, which means it might be something that the Prime Minister wants done which directly affects Australia's interests. So it might be like, all right, there's been 2 hostages taken in the middle of Cambodia. We need a team to go and get them out. SAS, you're going to work with these people and you're going to help get them out. You just wouldn't give those jobs to soldiers with basic training. So the expectations and the jobs and the individual responsibilities of people in the unit is much, much higher. And a couple of times I was there, I got briefings and I'd just be like, I felt out of my depth. I'm like, oh my God, this is heavy stuff. Like some of the things we might have to do are quite heavy.
A lot of your tours that you do and these missions that you do, as you said then, like you felt like sometimes you're out of place. You're talking about missions that the Prime Minister is sending your team and your unit to do. Are you allowed to like talk about all of these things, or were there some missions where you weren't, that, you know, they were top secret?
They're all considered top secret, but the only thing I don't cover is like the tactics and the detail. But funnily enough, it's kind of not the interesting part of it. The interesting part is how the unit's configured and how the politics works behind us getting sent away and what ends up happening for us. And I think Afghanistan was a good example where we were sent in initially to do a job, and then we stayed there for a long time and probably beyond what was useful. So yeah, that was an interesting one.
How is that? Because again, I'm referencing this to movies because I've never been in the Defence Force or in the SAS. But you know, I watch a movie called Saving Private Ryan, one of the most famous, you know, war movies of all time.
It's a cracker.
And it's that thing. It's no matter what happens in these missions, the overarching rule of anything is like do what you're commanded to do and respect, you know, the messages coming from above. How do you find that if you don't necessarily agree with what's going on, or you sort of have difference in views? Is it hard to so stick to the mission and really complete it?
It's interesting the way we do it is that there's a high level of really planning and involvement of everyone when we're trying to pull the mission together. So everyone debates the different approaches we can do. But once the decision is made around how we're going to do it, that's it. Everyone just goes. Yeah, all like everyone gets behind it and we just go, because you really can't have you can't hold back when you go into these missions and be second guessing yourself. If you commit to it, you've really got to go all in. And so I think for us that's what we did. We got these missions and we just said, all right, we're just going to go all in on these. And we never thought about the politics of it. We were there for each other. So.
Yeah. And the meticulous planning that goes into these missions, how structured and how planned out are these moves that you have to do, and how strict are the structures of what has to take place? Oh,
they're planned down to like, you know, Jimmy's going to have item X in his left pocket, which is related to the, you know, radio stuff. Like it's down to, you know, what people are wearing, what time you're going to leave, what your formation, all this information that you can control, you plan meticulously. And then there's all these other things you can't affect that the enemy can do to you. And so that becomes what we call wargaming. You consider all these different scenarios about how the enemy can interfere with that mission, and you plan out your response in advance. And so what happens is that doesn't always unfold that way on the ground, but if something comes out of left field, there's a chance you've at least already thought about how you're going to deal with it. It just makes you a lot more agile when it happens.
So you feel like you've literally crossed over every moment or every scenario that you can possibly have, and you've got a plan of action for it.
Yeah, like a good example, and this isn't from Australian forces, but when they did the Bin Laden raid, right? So Osama Bin Laden, one of the helicopters crashed on insertion. That's a huge deal. Like that's a really big risk in a mission. They would have planned that a number of times, and that's why you saw them in the film. They're running over, putting explosives on the helicopter and grabbing gear out of it, because that in the rehearsals they would have talked exactly about that.
If this happens,
and they would have said, you know what, Jimmy, you're going to have the charges. You go over there if this happens, and you're going to blow it up. So that advanced planning and thinking is where the kind of magic happens, because your plan is always going to come apart. It's always going to, under pressure, it's going to unravel in some way, and it's just how you deal with that that matters.
What, I suppose, are some of the stories that you would reflect on now being like some of the most intense tours or missions that you were a part of?
One for me was one of the first missions I did on my first deployment over there. It was we were asked to clear the Chora Valley, and it was in late 2007. And I talk about this actually in the book because it was the first time we ran into a heavy combat on a mission. And basically we went in there to run this clearance. There was kind of 80 to 100 Taliban, I think they were saying. And our team was doing all the advanced force operations. So we were going behind enemy lines, looking at what the enemy were doing, trying to figure out where they were, so that when the mission came, we were ahead of the curve already. And on the first morning, we kind of inserted in the dark and got set up. And in the morning, all the clearance force landed and took out and started clearing through the section of the valley that we were in. And me and my team picked up and went to another part of the valley further south to put in basically an ambush. And as we're moving down there, we ran into Taliban kind of defensive positions. And that started a battle that went for a long time. And it took us till that was in the morning. We didn't get out until that night. So we were in there for a long time, and ended up being a heavy battle. One of my team leaders was shot and killed in the opening kind of minutes of the battle. And I mean, we train for that all the time. We say, if we have a man down, this is what we're going to do. We're going to move him. And so we had to change our whole mission kind of on the fly to try and get this guy out who'd been shot and badly wounded. So it was full on. It was full on.
How, and look, I suppose I know the answer to this, but how do you deal with that, like sudden change straight away? Do you go straight into like autopilot of training? Is that how, like you're so much in the moment that you go, fuck, this is what we need to do next? Yeah,
I think that there's almost like a cutout switch in your mind. There's so much happening that you're like, all right, there's a lot happening that I'm just not going to deal with right now. We're going to do one thing, and then we're going to do this thing. And you're looking 5 seconds into the future sometimes. You're just like, I'm just going to survive through this bit. I'm going to jump in this ditch, and then I'm going to, speak to this guy. And you're making decisions in tiny increments because to survive, you've just got to get to that next step. And then once we were kind of secure, that's when you start thinking about how to move troops around and how you're going to suppress the enemy and how you're going to get helicopters in. And that's, I guess, where you go from just trying to survive to, all right, now we really have to come up with a plan to defeat what we're dealing with.
Are you allowed to go into context of how you did get out of that scenario? Like what ended up transpiring?
So what we did was we all pushed up to this kind of, this low ditch called an aqueduct. It's kind of knee height or waist height, and it's just enough cover to get in there and get protection from gunfire. So we were in there, we were pinned down dealing with a casualty, and there were 2 Apache gunships. These are attack helicopters. They were above us. And
on the Australian side, or were they from the Taliban?
No, Australian side. Yep. I'd be worried if the Taliban were driving those things.
Yeah.
We'd be in real trouble. But we had attack helicopters above us, and some of my guys was talking directly to the helicopters and marking the enemy positions with smoke. And so all this was happening as I was trying to move troops in place. And I remember hearing the first kind of cannon strike go in on the tree line, kind of maybe about 100 metres away. It was pretty close. And the tree line just bloody erupted in all this heavy cannon fire. And I remember seeing going, holy shit, if they're that close, then we're in a bit of trouble. And so the Apaches were trying to suppress the enemy that were on the other side of us. And I kind of remember saying, hey, I think they're going to come around our flank. I remember talking to the guy next to me. I think they're going to come around this flank in the river. And luckily, one of the guys in the team had a good idea about putting a sniper team up on basically a little section of high ground about 1,000 metres away to our left. And they were protecting our flank. They could see people coming up the river while we were in the thick kind of green belt, thick vegetation. And they started shooting in support of us. So we had kind of gunships firing on one flank and snipers firing the other. And I could hear their kind of heavy rounds coming down the valley. And they were landing close to us, like very close. I could kind of see the trees moving as the bullets were coming in from our snipers. And I was thinking, they're bloody close, because it's hard to see, right? You're trying to stay low. It is hard to see enemy to your front. So you're trained to shoot at areas where you think they might be hiding. So we were basically just trying to get space and suppress the enemy so we could move a bit. And eventually we did. We were able to kind of suppress them enough that we could move this guy back who'd been hit and bring helicopters in to try and evacuate him. And the helicopters that flew in, this is in broad daylight now, the helicopters that flew over the Taliban formation, and they got shot up. They took about, I think it was about 7 rounds. One helicopter took 7 rounds. And they landed, and we got this guy on and got him flying back to base. But unfortunately, he'd already died. He was badly wounded. So yeah, it was full on. It was a full on day, and that was the first time really that I'd been in a battle like that. And it was a tough day.
I can't even imagine how you then be in that battle, in the moment. You've just lost, a friend, a commander. How do you deal with that? Like what transpires from there? Do you go back to base and do you talk about it with your team? What happens?
Yeah, and funnily enough, there was no rule book on this. No one had really talked about it. It wasn't that common in the Australian Army. This is 2007. There'd been a guy killed in a mine blast a couple of weeks earlier, and there'd also been an SAS guy killed in a mine blast 5 years earlier in Afghanistan, but there was no kind of playbook on how you deal with that. It was hard. It was a hard thing. I think what we had on our side was the guys in my team are older. They're more mature. They have a better grasp of the risk and the situation that we're in, and we all know that risk, and you know that you could go out and be killed, and that's part of the job. So I think that made it easier for people to kind of to grasp and move on with. But it elevated the emotions of me in a way that I'd never dealt with in training. There was never that fear or grief, I think, that I'd felt, and that sense of even anger, like you want to get back at them, right? And that's not there in training necessarily. So that the human dimension of it played a bigger role than I guess I expected.
That was your first tour, your first mission that you'd done? Yeah,
that was my first deployment to Afghanistan. I'd done other missions to East Timor, and I'd actually been to East Timor 3 times by then, in Iraq, but that was the first kind of real combat mission. Yeah.
And would you say, is that the closest in your whole career that you came to feeling you were in a bit of strife as well?
Yeah, that was the first time I was like, I grasped just how dangerous.
I could actually be fucking shot here.
Yeah, you kind of know it, but then when you're confronted with it, I think I realised then, you're like, oh, you can get yourself in serious trouble. But also it made me better later on, because I understood, I guess, some of the risks involved and how you can get yourself in trouble and how you can kind of get around that. So I think in a way we got better after that. That was pretty high risk.
10 tours, as you mentioned, 4 in Afghanistan. What is a tour? How does it work? How long do they go for? Are they all quite similar in length? Is it more, on a specific mission, as you said before, on what you need to do? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, it's tours considered. Another phrase for it is a deployment. So you'll get an order, say, your battalion is going to deploy to East Timor. You're going to take over from the 3rd Battalion that's there now. You're going to be there for 6 months. While you're there, you're going to secure this province, and then you're going to leave in April, of this year. So you kind of get an idea about how long you're going for, and that's called a deployment or a tour. And so our tours to Afghanistan were generally around the 6-month mark, and I think you're starting to burn out a bit by that time, because it's intense work, and you're all hours of day and night, and not many days off. So that's kind of the limit of what you could do. But I found myself, it was high stress, and I found myself really fraying mentally by the end of that first tour. I was exhausted.
What took place through these times is you obviously got a promotion. You go to a Special Operations Team Commander. Can you talk us through what that is and what the role of that would be, and when that took place in your journey?
Yeah, so when I finished my training in the reinforcement cycle, I was a troop commander, which means I was a captain, and it means you're in charge of about 30 people. It's like same as a platoon almost. And in that platoon, you've got 3 or 4 smaller teams called patrols. In the infantry units, they're called sections. So you've got these small groups that are led by a team, and I would lead the 3 team leaders or the 4 team leaders. And that's kind of a basic unit of deployment. You can take that, you can move them around. You can move around as 3 pieces. You can work together and cooperate. And it's how military units have been set up for a really long, almost thousands of years now. And so when you're a troop commander, you're responsible for planning the missions. You lead the team in battle and after battle, and you're basically responsible for what happens. And so it's a good role, but it's high pressure as well. You're expected to do a lot. How many people would you? 3 teams? Were you saying 3 troops you'd be in command of? Yeah. So when I was over there, this is in 2007. I had 4 teams of about 6 guys plus some supporting elements.
What did you learn in terms of leadership in that stage? Was that like the biggest sort of time for you to be like, fuck, I'm actually leading all these people now? How did you grow as a leader, and what did you find most important in your leadership style to actually command all these people?
I think the most important thing I learned was that if you're going to do something hard like that, you really do need to harness. You need to be able to make decisions quickly, but you also got to be able to, in planning, harness the skills and capabilities and experience of the people you already have. Because if you put your heads together as a group, you can always come up with a really good plan. if you try and do it individually, it's not going to be anywhere near as good. So I think it's that being willing to, you don't always need to be the one with all the great ideas. You can actually harness the group, and then you control kind of what comes out of that. And then when you go on the field, you're expected to lead. But it's a great thing about that unit is everyone there is selected because they have, basic or good leadership skills, even the most junior guys. So you're dealing with everyone that's a kind of a thinker and a doer, and that just makes life a lot easier when you're in charge of these teams. They act often without being told at all.
And when you talk about leadership, obviously you've got to put so much trust into all the guys that you're working with in these high stake missions. Has there ever been any times where it's, you've lost trust of someone in a team and being like, fuck, I can't work with this person anymore. Like, they go off and don't do what they're told, or they might not execute a mission on what was meant to actually be done, and you've had to deal with that?
Yeah, it's pretty rare. And the reason it's rare is because of the training and selection. Yeah. Because you're put under so many situations so often that are so hard that those people just don't get to the end of the training. Yep. So, and even if they do, they're generally rejected by a team if they're not up to it, because there's so much at stake, right? Like the teams are good at knowing who's up to standard and who's not.
Yep. And as you said, like they wouldn't make the team in the first place if they were all about themselves or weren't following the right protocols.
No, they wouldn't make it at all.
What are big misconceptions you feel from the outside public or people that aren't involved in Defence Force or SAS that they might have about what you do?
I think people are surprised when they think soldiers just click their heels and do what they're told and charge the machine guns. Soldiers are all thinking people. They all care deeply about what they're doing. They don't just salute and go and follow orders. They really need to be brought around, and they all are interested in what they're doing. They want to do it at the best possible level they can. And I think people are surprised at just how they're decent beings. And I think a bad war can turn people, even good people, bad. But all the guys I worked with, all of them were really good people.
Huge. Your wealth of knowledge, your training, the amount of years you've been in the SAS, the Defence Force, as a commander, you're a leader, it through that time you acquire a certain set of skills that not the elite, not the average person would have. Now you've written a book, you do a lot of corporate talks and share your story on leadership, resilience, bouncing back from mental health and post-traumatic stress from these battles. What would you say is a massive skill that you've learned in resilience transitioning from the SAS?
I think the biggest thing is understanding that you can change yourself no matter what situation you're in, and you don't need to be defined by kind of your past or what's happened to you in the past. You can actually change what your future looks like if you're willing to put the work in. I think sometimes people go, well, I can't do that because, I've been a postie my whole life and I won't be able to change and become the world's top pastry chef. Well, you can actually do it, but you've got to be willing to admit to yourself that you can make that change and find a new goal and work hard towards it. I think people have fallen into the trap of thinking they can get these hacks and they can do these little shortcuts, and sometimes you can't. If you want to do something really good, it's going to take you a long time, and you've got to have the patience and the humility to put the work in for that period of time. I think sometimes there are no shortcuts, and persistence over a long period and small changes over a long period is what can do it.
Huge. You finish up in the SAS after 10 tours, 10 deployments. What's the journey like transitioning out of combat?
Yeah, I took a posting when I left SAS. I took a posting to the Royal Military College Duntroon, which is linked to the Defence Academy, which I mentioned. It's more Army centric, whereas the Defence Academy covers Army, Air Force, and Navy. This one's just Army, and it's like a finishing school for Army officers. It's where you learn how to do platoon level leadership and command and fighting. So
you're teaching the guys and girls that are finishing up to travel out.
So I'm now going back and I'm looking at myself kind of 10 years earlier.
It would have been surreal.
It was surreal. Yeah, it was really surreal because I remember being there. It's a formative experience as a young person because you're so eager to learn, because you're about to go out and lead troops, and everyone's nervous about it, and you want to be kind of best at your job as you can be. And I remember that instructors with combat experience were just so rare. We didn't really have any back then. And it was a chance for me to go and show these kids kind of things that you can learn now that you don't have to go and learn on the battlefield. And so we had a curriculum of stuff we had to teach them. And you do need to learn some of the basics of kind of administration and marching and being an officer, but I didn't really care about any of that. And I put all my focus into, I'm going to take you out into the field and I'm going to let you make all your mistakes, all your leadership mistakes now. But I expect you to go out and work hard and take a risk and do all your learning now. So we did these huge missions where I'd take cadets into townships and I'd have a full enemy force and I'd have helicopters and dogs, and we'd do these big high-level missions, and they'd learn a lot just by getting out there and making these mistakes. And it was great. And I was burnt out, so I found I was having trouble putting in long hours at work, but it was rewarding. It was really good to go full circle and help people.
I flashbacks of watching some videos on YouTube. I'm a sucker for inspirational army videos on YouTube. And there's this one video that really sticks out. It's of a US, very high up. I'm not sure what the title was, but he talks about making your bed. I'm not sure if you've seen this before.
Yeah, I think it was McRaven, right?
Okay, yeah, it sounds like him. But it was unbelievable.
He's the guy, the officer basically that led the Bin Laden raid.
So that was
the high level kind of planner for that mission. Yeah.
Is that something that you guys actually would talk about? Is like, the little things all add up to the big things? Making your bed, doing these sort of things actually correlates to how you live your life? Yeah,
it's funny. The way military training is structured, it's been that way for a long, long time. Clean your boots, inspect your equipment, make your bed. And the reason they do it, it's kind of the old Mr. Miyagi, right? It's like, the reason we're showing you this is because the detail is going to matter and the self-discipline is going to matter when you start getting into combat and you've got a rifle and you've got to do planning and you've got to be meticulous. They really instill that in you from an early age.
Transitioning out, as we mentioned, you're at Duntroon teaching. Teaching is probably not the right word. What would be the
like instructing?
Instructing. Yeah. So instructing the youth coming through that are about to transition to the next phase of their journeys. Something that is prevalent, I suppose. I'm not sure how common it is, but something that can be highly expected in a role that you've done and face and done such a good job at is post-traumatic stress from these things. And you've helped so many people with this post your career in the SAS. Was it always something that you were passionate in talking about and helping people, or was it something where you sort of only realised that you could actually help people by sharing your story?
I think it's something that when I first knew I was dealing with it, I guarded it closely because I wanted to keep working in that space. I didn't want some mental health issue taking me out of that operational space. So I had to kind of deal with it myself. I went and spoke to a psychiatrist and a psychologist, and some of them were helpful and some of them weren't. But over years, I had to basically look after myself. I've not been looking after myself, really. And you have to, I think when you've got this, you've got to accept, all right, I need to understand what's wrong with me. Then I need to make all these small changes to my life so that it doesn't dominate me and I can still work. Mm-hmm. And I think that was one of the hardest bits because you're just not trained to deal with that, really. And it's not something I talked a lot about until I got out of the army and then went back into kind of keynote speaking. And I spoke to some companies about it, and they really latched onto it. And I didn't realise this until recently, but it's actually, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of burnout. There's a lot of mental health issues, even in the workforce, because of how we're structured now and smartphones and working long hours. It's people are burned out.
And what's your messaging to someone that is suffering or is going through something like this? What helped you the most? Like you said then that you weren't looking after yourself. What were you not looking after yourself with? Was it just day-to-day things or giving yourself time to breathe or, accept your story and accept your journey?
I wasn't doing the basics right. Like if you stop sleeping, if you drink too much to try and self-medicate, if you're not eating properly, all these things contribute to your overall physical and mental health. And I think I'd really taken a step back in that front. You meant to be an elite soldier, but I wasn't looking after myself enough. So I went to one guy that was a neuroscientist and a psychologist as well. And he explained the science of it. He goes, your mind, you've completely had to rewire it while you've been in combat. You've been overusing a really ancient part of your mind. And while you've been doing that, trying to survive, the more evolved parts have really taken a back step. They've been benched. So he basically said, we're going to rebalance you. This is how we're going to do it. We're going to concentrate on your diet, exercise. You're going to rest more. You're going to book a surf trip each year with your mates and go out and have some fun. And I think being disciplined about that consistently is hard to do. So people get busy, they stop doing all that.
100%.
Stop exercising. It's hard to do it, to have the self-discipline to do that stuff consistently. And that's kind of what I preach. I'm just like, just go back to basics, look after yourself, get some sleep, and you'll find your way back to good health.
I couldn't agree more. Like when things are going well for me, like, I'm working out, I'm eating well, drinking water, going to bed early, but as soon as I get stressed, then I'll start having a beer and, you have a big weekend, then it just fucking snowballs into something else. And it does really affect you. But like you said, it's that consistency of being on top of these things that actually can get better. It'll make things a lot easier. Yeah.
And I think too, don't be too hard on yourself. Like you're saying, like you are going to have bad patches where you don't stick to things properly, but as long as you've got that awareness and that to correct yourself, you have to go back to that different course. I think that's the main thing. I even had that last week. I was sick 3 times back to back, and I never get that. And my kid had gone back to kind of daycare, but I realised I was just like, I haven't been training enough, have not been eating well, had a few drinks. Like it just adds up, cumulatively. So you got to watch it.
I can imagine as well as being in an SAS and doing the things that you've been a part of, seeing the things that you've seen. As mentioned before, you're in battle. Not many people can say they've seen the Taliban, firing at them. They've seen one of their best mates pass away in front of them. How is it coming back to Australia? And as I mentioned before, we're so naive here. We don't know what goes on. We don't see these things being like, fuck, I've just been out here. I've just done all of these things, all these missions. I've done this training. I've done this, but no one would actually have any idea what I've done, and no one can relate to what I've done.
It was pretty surreal. I'd come back. I lived in Cottesloe in Perth. And I remember going down to a cafe and sitting there, and this is something I used to do religiously when I was back home, and it was always something I loved doing. But I'd sit there and I'd hear conversations, and you'd be like, we're on different planets here.
Yeah.
Like there's one world that exists in the Middle East where we're fighting and trying to survive, and then there's another world back here. And I actually was resentful about it. I'm like, you guys have no idea. You have no idea. And I'm a bit more forgiving now. Like it's not people's fault. They're not aware of it, or they're not told, or the war wasn't sufficiently threatening to Australia's interests for people to really sit up and pay attention. If there was someone on a doorstep 100 k's off the north coast of Darwin, everyone would be paying attention. But that wasn't the case in Afghanistan, at least not after the initial part of the war.
Do you think soldiers and SAS and Defence Force get enough support on the transition out of their time served and supporting the country? Like I can imagine how hard it is for anyone that's worked a job for their whole life. I speak about a lot playing footy. Like it's a hard transition to something and you've lived and breathed, to then just to go out and be doing something else. Is there enough support for the people that serve for Australia to help transition into the real world?
Yeah, it's a lot better than it used to be, right? Like there's really no good mechanisms in place many years back, but now you've got all sorts of organisations that help. There's Veterans Affairs, there's a lot of non-profits that exist. But I feel like it is quite a fragmented approach. Like there's a lot of support out there, but it's not necessarily tied together. And there's no incentive for any organisation to help on the back end. At the front end of a soldier's career, you're trained and trained and trained. And then at the back end, like, why would you invest time and effort and resources in helping people transition out?
Yeah.
It's just a cost, right? So that's where the gap exists. And that's why I think when people come out, even though they've got great skills, it can sometimes be a bit, discombobulating or whatever that word is, where you come out and you're like, oh, I don't know what to do next.
Yeah. I feel like even though you've said this and this is so obvious from this chat and even from an outside perspective, but you think about what someone like yourself has been through and trained through, leadership, resilience, communication, it nearly makes you the most employable person in the world to walk into any workforce and be able to use these skills and just transfer them into another industry.
Yeah, I went to I went to business school and then a consulting firm, and I had that same frustration that I felt like I had a lot to offer, but what I didn't have was
degrees or
yeah. What I didn't have was the basic understanding of how business works, or the knowledge, or that, it's like you can't go to a footy team if you don't know how to kick with your left foot. Like if you don't have that skill, you're not going to be in the team. And that's the kind of equivalent of when I went into business. There were some fundamentals that I didn't know, and I think one thing I tell people is like have that discipline and the understanding that you are going to the bottom of the heap, and even you do have a lot of good skills, but you've got to learn the basics before you can start using them properly.
Fair enough. Mark, tell me about this book, because it's unbelievable. We got a copy yesterday. We're very lucky to get this, Sam. Sam was having, we got two. We got one. This is mine, obviously, and I'm going to get you to write a note for me. Survive a Life in the SAS. You know what I love about this book? It's full of knowledge. It's thick. Bear Grylls is giving you a pump up on the start. It's just a powerful, honest story of courage, redemption, and finding purpose. And the best thing is, the photos in this, there's a few pictures in this book as well. They are unbelievable. They actually give me goosebumps of some of these photos of you, like in deployment on your tours. There's one here that probably looks like you were. Is that in the?
That was that part.
Is that the part you were talking about?
Just
referencing you with these ropes. The story we were talking about earlier, in wetsuits, fucking in some truck that I've never seen before with some guns. Like, it's honestly hectic, some of these things that you've done. Like, what sort of gun is that?
That's an M4 with a grenade launcher on the bottom.
Okay. I don't have one of those. And like this stuff here, like what are some of these photos combining? Like it's fucking incredible.
Yeah, this is all kind of Afghanistan. So you see how kind of Spartan parts of it are. It's like just
how do you hide desert there? Like how are you? Where's the shelter? Like there's.
Well, that's where it gets interesting is in the valleys. That's where all the vegetation is, right? And that's where everyone lives, and they're farmers down there. And so we found ourselves later going out of the desert into these, what we call the green belt, to work in there. It's like close country in some ways. You go from desert to almost like thick vegetation. And, yeah.
Unbelievable. Talk me through the book. What actually takes place in writing a book? Like this, it seems fascinating to me. How do you actually go about it? Like, is it a timely process? Are you literally just jotting down every story? Is it a chronological order of your life? Like, what else can we expect to read in here?
After I got home, after that first battle I mentioned, I wrote down some notes about it, because it had been the most significant thing that had happened to me. I knew it would affect me for years after. Mm. And so I'm glad I did, because the notes that I took about it, I was able to use some of the detail of it in the book. And it's never encouraged, like Special Forces guys, it's never encouraged to go and write books. But I wanted to tell the story. I think it's important. And I think the important thing for me is that I was, respectful about the families of the fallen.
Yep.
And I was respectful about making sure there's no operational security issues in there, which I've done. And so if I could achieve those two things, then that's okay. I was happy to put the book out. And I think for the most part, it's going to be a helpful addition to the conversation about soldiers and coming home. And I first thought about doing this in 2017. I'd spoken to a publisher, and I kind of shelved it because my boy was born. It wasn't quite the right time. Mm. And I'm glad I waited, because when I revisited the idea at the end of 2019, I spoke to a publisher again, and then I pulled together a book proposal, which is really just a business case.
How does that work?
Yeah, it's like, well, there's all sorts of things you can search on it, but it's basically a case of you saying as an author, like, this is what I want to write. This is why I think it's an important book. And a publisher, they're going to want to sell. That's why they exist as a business. So they're going to want to know what the market size is for it, and what's a comparable title, and what do you think you can sell. And based on that, they'll say, well, we think this is a timely book. We're looking to acquire it. And then they'll ask you they'll sign a contract for you to then write the book. And I signed a contract to write Survivor, and that was at the end of 2019. And basically a couple of weeks after I went to Sydney and saw the editor, the place got shut down for COVID. And then I wrote this during lockdown. I spent 4 months during lockdown writing it. And it's kind of surreal. It's like I can't quite remember doing it, but there it is in book format. So I must have.
Yeah, I can probably safely say you have done it. There is some words in here. You write in the book, there's a really powerful part here saying, I didn't anticipate the cost of war, professional, personal, and human. Can you discuss that a little bit for us?
Yeah, I think I studied kind of military history, and you read about battles and all that stuff, but I don't think I always thought about what it would be like to train and get to fight, but I never thought about the part after, which is how do you kind of reconcile it and how do you move on then for the rest of your life. And that part was, I guess, a little bit harder than I thought it would be. And that's where in this book I wanted to talk about that part explicitly. And that's how I kind of pitched it to the publisher too. I'm like, I won't make this strictly a military memoir. This will actually be about leaving these situations and trying to find a way back into life. And that gives it a broader audience, and there's all sorts of parallels you can pull to that, you will face hardships in life, but there is another way out. Yeah. And
that's what I love about your character, mate. And look, we've touched on one facet of who you are today, but you're a fashion designer. You got your own label, Kill Capture, as well. You're a model, entrepreneur, public speaker, a veteran. It looks like, from my point of view and what you've been through now, you've really acted on those things, and you're a doer. You have transitioned and you've found these multifacets of your life and other things, not letting one thing define you, but others as well. Was that the goal of transitioning, I suppose?
Yeah, I think one thing, my mum died quite young. I was 23. She was 50 when she died. She got cancer. And this is just before I'd been to the SAS. And that was a real kind of a wake-up call for me, I guess. It was like, you might not have as much time as you think. And it gave me that sense of kind of desperation to try and do things. And I think I always checked in with myself after. I was like, am I trying to do all this stuff because you're trying to outrun your issues or something? But I think I just wanted to try a lot of different things and find something that was motivating and fun. And that's why I did the TV show. I was like, oh, this looks like bloody good fun, you know? And it was great fun. And I met Sam, my wife, on this TV show. So it was funny.
You've done it all. As you said, you leave there, you go over to the US in New York, you study business at one of the best Ivy League schools over there. That's when you launch a new brand. You've got your established brand now, Kill Capture. Talk us through that. How did this come about? It looks, I honestly love it. I don't think I could pull it off because I'm a little dweeb. I feel like you need to be like 190, very. I feel like people wouldn't take me seriously. I hope they would.
When I was going over to the US, I didn't really have like a proper wardrobe. You live in the army, you don't have a lot of that stuff. But I thought, what do I want to wear when I'm over there? I'd always wanted a leather jacket. So I saved some money and I was poking around in the US for a decent leather jacket, and all the brands I was looking at, I'm like, oh, these aren't really that good. And I didn't like the values and the branding. And I was like
Mick Jagger style, was it?
It was like, like there's like Diesel, kind of faux tough brands. Yeah. And I thought, imagine if you had like a legit ex-special ops streetwear brand, that there's a gap for that. And I don't think garment design is sufficiently hard enough that it stops people from doing it. Like I went to the garment district with this idea to build a cool leather jacket, and all I had was a phone number of a lady that was a designer in there. And I went in.
Sounds like a story a lot earlier with the SAS guy that you called up randomly.
Exactly. Yeah. Just got a habit of cold calling people. And and she took me on and goes, "This is how we build garments. We sketch them out, we design them." And I went out in the garment district and chose everything for this jacket and got it built and designed and rolled it out at a fashion show at business school. And I was just motivated by that whole thing of, how do I explain what combat was like? I remember having that thing. I'm like, well, one of the best ways with a clothing brand is you can do everything from a product to a video to to branding and copy. And that's kind of what I've tried to do with a brand is say, this is what it's like to be in an elite team. This is what it's like to prioritize a mission in a team over yourself. And that's where I think it's a different approach to streetwear with different values. And for a certain segment of people, it really resonates.
100%. What else is in the works for Kill Capture? Is there any other garments you're looking at creating?
Yeah, there is. There's a female jacket called the Juliet. That's like the military kind of symbology for the J call sign. We call it the Romeo and Juliet.
Yes.
So Juliet jacket will be the female jacket. We've got handmade tomahawks coming from the US.
Jesus.
We've got so it's like a type of gifts capsules. We've got a bunch of accessories coming. So belts. We've got a watch partnership we've got up and running. So we're trying to build basics for men that will really last a long time.
Unreal. So is that Kill Capture? How can we find that? Killcapture.com?
Killcapture.com. Capture spelt with a K.
We love that. KK. Fantastic. And mate, I forgot to tell you about the book as well. That's on the 25th. So where can we get our hands on this? Is this at every good bookstore?
It will be, it'll be all the major bookstores. You can actually pre-order it now.
Fantastic.
And you can do that through my website, which is markwales.com.au /book. And there's, it's available for pre-order now. So all the e-commerce sites have it, and they just reduce the price, which is really annoying. But get in there
and read. It's definitely worth it. After today, I think everyone's going to be ordering this. We'll also have that in the show notes, guys and girls. So make sure you check that out and give it an order, a pre-order, or get into the stores, mate. You've done it, as we said. You've done a lot in your life. Now got a beautiful young son, family. You said it's Samantha's. Life's great. What's next for you? Is there anything else you want to sort of try your toes at and really jump into the water?
Yeah, there is. I've always wanted to be an extra on a Mad Max film.
Do you need the number of someone there? You just want to call the director?
I found the casting company. I'm going to write to them and be like, hey, take me as an extra in a Mad Max film, because they're filming the Furiosa prequel in Australia. And I was like, because originally they were going to do the last Mad Max like 10 years ago, and it was going to be filmed in Australia, and then the drought broke and they couldn't film it there, so they went to Namibia, and so they didn't take as many Aussie extras, but this time they're in Australia, so I'll try and stick my head in and get on the set.
Unbelievable. Mark, honestly, I cannot thank you enough for coming in today, mate. You have such an incredible story. It's so powerful of what you've been able to do, and how you've been able to overcome certain things that have transpired in your life. You're an absolute go-getter, mate, and we love that. We love people to just have a crack, and you absolutely sum that up. So it's honestly a privilege to have you in the studio, hear your story. And in all honesty and in all seriousness to everyone, thank you so much for your service for our country. And it's been a real privilege having you.
Mate, thanks for having me, and love what you guys are doing, and hope we get to meet again and get a beer somewhere too.
We should definitely have some beers. This week's episode is brought to you by Stuffed. Gone are the days of spraying deodorant as a weird flex to get girls or a chiseled pack of abs. Being a man is not about how good you look, but how good you feel. And thank goodness this day and age we have Stuff. Stuff keeps things simple and real for men with their range of personal care. Finally, there is a brand that men can align with that actually reflects the real world. No BS. Stuff champions healthy masculinity and also helps fund men's mental health via their charity partner, the Man Cave. By using Stuff, you're not only feeling good, but doing good. They've got stuff for your body, your head, your face, your pits, and all the important bits. It's Australian made, cruelty free, planet friendly, and contains no bad stuff like parabens and aluminium. So get around it and buy it for yourself and your mates, and you'll be supporting young men's mental health while feeling fresh AF. Use the code STUFFDYL for 20% off at the websiteofstuff.com. That's 20% off with the code STUFFDYL at the website www.websiteofstuff.com. That's 20% off. The link's in the show notes.